All right, everybody, welcome to our next Perceptive podcast here on the Game Wisdom channel. I am Josh Placer, and we have another great discussion about game design tonight. My guest, he runs the podcast Level Design Lobby, and he has a background in game design and level design. And he's on as we're going to be discussing open world design and development. So please welcome to the podcast, Max Pears.
Hey, thank you very much for having me on. It's an absolute pleasure to be here and be talking with you, sir, about a great topic. And thank you to everyone tuning in for this.
This is going to be a very interesting one because we just did a recorded podcast for Max's
Yes.
cast about 40 minutes ago, and that almost went extra long. So we need to be really careful about this one. And I think this is going to be a really great one. I think people are going to be coming in. If you have any questions about level design or open world gameplay, feel free to leave them in the comments, and we'll see how things develop. So, since this is your first time on my cast, I did my introduction for you, so we're going to flip things around. It's your turn. So, feel free to tell everyone about who you are and what you do.
Thank you very much, mate. It's funny how the tables now have turned for us.
Now, I have to do the work when this is all over.
Yeah, exactly. So I am, as I said, Max Pears. I'm a level designer. I've been doing it professionally for about 6.5 years. Worked on such titles as Tom Clancy's The Division at Ubisoft previously, as well as some mobile games before that. I've worked on a range of different titles from AAA to mobile, and one of the most craziest ones I worked on was augmented reality as well. And as you mentioned earlier, sir, I make and edit the podcast Level Design Lobby, in which I discuss all topics related to level design. So if you're interested in that topic, please check out the podcast, as you might find it useful. And that's really me, mate. It's always weird introducing yourself, isn't it?
Yeah. And I don't think it gets any easier, too.
No, and like you said, we said on my podcast, it's so weird, like hearing your own voice, and then when you like talking about yourself, it sounds super rude sometimes. I'm like, because you know who you are, and you're like, I don't want to do this, So, no, but thank you again for having me on, man. I'm really excited about the topic.
Oh, yes. And for the people watching live, let us know if there's any issues with audio, video, anything like that. It's always weird when we're setting these things up like that.
Yes.
Let me see here. 1 second. I just want to make sure that we are, in fact, going live. Yeah, there we go. Again, YouTube Studio has been a nightmare in terms of trying to get all this stuff set up.
Yeah, it's never. Yeah.
But
always changing.
I know. But for our topic, then, we're going to be discussing again open world design, and this is a very interesting one because the open world genre, I think, for a lot of people, really blew up. I think that was 2001, 2002 with Grand Theft Auto 3.
Yeah,
that was the game that I think that game was just like one of those like defining moments for the game industry all around. And it's the one that kind of gave everyone this idea that, oh my goodness, we can do all of this in this kind of space.
Oh yeah, mate. No, you're completely right. And I think one of the most interesting parts of that is, you mentioned Rockstar with Grand Theft Auto 3, but it's like they never stopped Rockstar. They've just constantly pushed and pushed and pushed the bar. And when we take a look now compared to, like you said, at that time period, everyone was blown away by what could be done. And now with Red Dead Redemption 2, again, everyone is blown away by the amount of content within that game. So it's crazy how it started then and how much it's evolved to where we are now, as most games have some form of open world elements, whether that be side quests or much more sprawling maps that we didn't have at the time due to limitations of the consoles.
And to a board fan's comment, that is another really tricky point when it comes to open world gameplay. Because I think it's also one of those genres that it is very easy to screw up, and there's only really, I think, a handful of really strong examples of it. Oh, go ahead.
No, I think it's an interesting point because there's been so many different takes, and I think it's hard to nail down because we spoke briefly on when we were talking earlier. I'm stumbling with my words. We spoke earlier about how it really depends a lot of this on your the core of your game and making sure it fits that. You know, when you take an example, Grand Theft Auto 3, and now look at Legend of Zelda: Breath in the Wild, it's a
Hmm.
very different style
Yes.
of open world, but it works so beautifully. But yeah, I know some people who aren't a fan of it because there's less structure towards it. There isn't
Hmm.
as much, I don't want to say hand holding because it's not the right word, but guidance, I say, to go off and do this because it's very much on you as the player. So I think it all comes down to how much does it match the overall core pillars of the game.
Man, I think that's a really good point. Again, like as we said, when Grand Theft Auto 3 came out, it basically started this open world rush of games, just like World of Warcraft doing the MMO rush.
Yeah.
And so many games were trying to emulate Grand Theft Auto,
Mm.
and I think a lot of them just did not work. Or, as to Board's point, it felt more like a pseudo open world. Um,
Yeah.
to give you an example, a few months ago, I replayed Destroy All Humans 1 and 2. They were like on the
Oh
holiday
wow.
sale. And,
Amazing. I haven't played them in years. Okay.
and it was like I liked some of the elements, but it was just so horribly dated. And like this was long before the likes of Breath of the Wild, Red Dead, even like
Yeah.
Just Cause as well. And you can really feel that difference. And I think this is where this idea of the pseudo open world comes into play. Because when you look at a lot of those older or quote unquote open world games, the open world is just like a layer on top of the
Yeah.
missions. Like when you're in the missions, the open world doesn't matter. When you're in the open world, the missions don't matter. And we even still see that to this day.
Mm.
I'm sure for you and for the people watching, you must have either seen or played a Marvel Spider-Man by Insomniac Games.
Oh yes. Yep. Brilliant game. Really
Yeah.
well done by them. Really, really good job.
And I think it still runs into that similar issue that once you go into a mission, the entire of New York disappears.
Yeah. No, it's very interesting you say that because again, there's always been that's been one of the comments I think about open world in general, how everything seems to be put on pause. Oblivion has that the constant thing where it's spoken about where the world's going to end, but I'm going to go off and join and do all these
Mm-hmm.
amazing things. And I think it's a tough call. I think when you're talking about from development because
Mm-hmm.
there has been games where certain side quest or activities won't be available after a certain time frame.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that comes down from a production cost. I think it's really interesting about that because you obviously really said you don't want that feeling that we just spoke about. You want it to be intertwined, but also it's a shame to take certain things away from players. That's people have spent a lot of time making.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be great, great stuff for the players to check out. But yeah, I think that is one of the things I think we'll be seeing hopefully moving forward
Mm-hmm.
in how the worlds connect with main missions, and I look forward to seeing how other developers out there tackle that because it is one of the most kind of jarring, I guess, is the word
Mm-hmm.
feelings when you're connecting those two elements of the game.
Yeah. And like we've seen, like my fans know that I've coined the term a Upin world design to describe kind of Ubisoft style that they kind of
Mm,
really populated with the Assassin's Creed franchise. We even saw
yeah,
that with Marvel's Spider-Man, where the side quests are just kind of like, I hope you like climbing this tower. You're going to be doing it at least 30 to 40 times more in this game. Or I hope you like this little defend this like a territory mission. That's going to be repeated again and again and again. And
mm,
it just like those kinds of games just I think really they just I think wear on my nerves a little bit. Like another example, Horizon Zero Dawn. I think that was what was called. Like
Yeah,
that's another very celebrated game, and I
yeah.
got about like an hour or two into it. I was just like, I am feeling really bored of this game. Like I've hunted the monster, I've hunted the mechanical dinosaur, I've opened up another waypoint. I'm gonna be doing this 70 to 80 more times in this game. Like
Mm.
I've seen this all. What else can you do for me? And I'm gonna let you kind of respond to that because I have a topic I want to like segue into from that.
Okay, mate. I think one of the things that will be interesting to see, like moving forward, is a great example with different diverse kind of side quests is that of Witcher 3,
Mm-hmm.
and even in the new Assassin's Creed, with Origins and Odyssey, I think it's you can see where stuff is starting to go now, and I think that's what's the most exciting part is that when you take when you said about destroy all humans feeling dated, I think we're going to see this again, and we've seen where what that was. Because again, it was at the time when that came out, phenomenal game. Like I really enjoyed that. Me and my brother played that as kids. And but as you say, like it's a product of its time, and we're seeing things change, develop, and move forward. And, Breath of the Wild, I think, is one of the games that is a step forward in showing how, as well as Witcher 3, in showing how open worlds need to fit in with the overall core of your game as well. And I think Spider-Man, I didn't play Horizon, so I
Mm-hmm.
can't comment on that one. But I do think Spider-Man did different things to help it feel, it tied into the overall narrative, which I thought worked really well. Batman has some nice ones in
Yeah.
Arkham Asylum too.
Mm-hmm.
But again, I think we're going to see more of this coming forward. And the other thing that we need to think about is like it does cost a bit, obviously, to make these games as games are getting bigger. So I can see why, in terms of production value, that's why things are going there. But I do think because of the fact that people are talking about it, we're seeing people evolve with it. I think it's going to be exciting to see where all of this goes in the next few years, in the next few games. I think there's going to be some really exciting things moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it is very interesting to see just how much the idea of open world design has
Mm,
evolved, as you said. And
yeah.
to a question in chat, Withered asked, "What do you think of Gothic and Skyrim?" And you mentioned Skyrim a few minutes ago.
Mm,
Like we've seen, like along with like The Witcher 3 and a lot of the RPG kind of games that came, or especially CRPG design this past decade, has really embraced more of that open structure, while the JRPG side kind of focuses more on like not so much a fixed story, but you're kind of moving from plot to point. Like you said
yeah.
earlier, like those are games that are very happy to close up stories or lock things away. And I think it's very tough to do these kinds of games because one of the issues I think has always been the mechanics that are
Mm,
kind of built into this world. And this is one of the things I wanted to touch on. Like going back to Marvel Spider-Man, there's very little that you can impact in the open world. You have, besides the web swinging, you have the combat and the stealth elements. But those two systems don't really impact the world around you. And it always, I think, leads into this idea of, I think, who said in chat? I think somebody mentioned like some like this kind of like theme park. Here it is, like board fans. Much I love an open world theme park. That the problem is that, as we said, like for a lot of these games, the open world kind of feels like a different universe from the actual gameplay in it. How many
mm.
people have played a game like, especially like Just Cause, where you can shoot rocket launchers into buildings, but only the specific buildings will actually collapse. For everything else, you can just like you can literally ram a jet plane or a tank into that building, and it'll bounce off of it.
I mean, that's what normally happens. I tried to ram a tank into a building earlier and just bounce away. No, I think those are all interesting points, and thank you for everyone asking questions. I really appreciate it. I think what's going to be what I look forward to seeing more in in open world games, and would love to see more of it. Is and it'd be interesting if this happens, or if someone has come up with a different. Because maybe I'm completely off with this, and maybe this is just my thoughts. But I think when you got especially more linear games, say back in the era of like the PlayStation 2 and Xbox One, like the original Xbox One, the first one. God, that's confusing. But no, like back in those days when you had those really cool games on those platforms, when you got a new mechanic in those games, you would then have like the next part of the level introducing the player to those mechanics, making sure that they can master those mechanics and move forward with them, like really kind of sell how powerful this new ability is to the player. Mm-hmm. What I would love to see, because it touches briefly on what you're saying, mate, is I would love to see the player get to experiment with, if there's a new mechanic unlocked in a mission within that area, then you have more kind of puzzles, more kind of abilities needed for that area in it. So that way, like you're saying, you feel the change as a player and then you feel it on the world as well. I think that's a really important one. And the same with what you mentioned with leaving an impact. You can go do these things, but sometimes it's not necessarily changing. Well, a great example I found that was really good in making the world feel changed. I don't know if it was technically an open world game, but if anyone remembers Batman Arkham Asylum, they did a great example. When you're going to, it was the lead up to a new boss. So if you're going to fight Poison Ivy, suddenly the Asylum was covered in tons of plants. And then when you've defeated her, and we move on to the Joker, now there's tons of Joker graffiti all around this area, showing you have things that have changed. Deus Ex Mankind Divided did a great one, is each time you went off, because the home hub area was that of Prague, each time you left and came back, the situation had changed. Whether it be the first time you visit and then a bomb goes off, to when you're finally there and the city's on complete lockdown. I think things like that will help with it. And Spider-Man does go with that as well. When you get to near the end of the game and the riots have broken out, they've now got snipers on roofs to try and tie in with the narrative of that. So I think we're starting to see that move through. But again, I think it's going to be interesting how people go from there, because I think my examples might be good in theory, but as for in practice, I'm not sure yet. But I think that would be really interesting to see where it all goes. And I can't remember other games, but I'm sure there has been. I'm trying to remember what game it is, but I'm sure there's been examples of. Was it Division 2? I think when once you beat kind of those sort of outposty kind of areas, then a different kind of gang would come back and take that over. It's those sort of things which you build upon. I know in Division 1 we had it where there was this enemy base, and once you took that out, then what happened is you'd see people come back to it. I did a level myself in the open world where actually I worked with James Walton and Dan Hargreaves, to shout out to those amazing people as well who helped make this area. And basically what you did is you were walking on kind of like a public execution in the open world. And after you beat them, you would find a door that was locked. And this was actually hiding more like refugees hiding away from the LMB. But after you came back, later on, some time had passed, there would be more civilians spawned in the area, showing them mourning for those who had been executed earlier. But again, as we were talking about environmental storytelling on my podcast, sometimes they're not always noticed. So I think it's about us as developers maybe kind of pushing the scale of these to help bring more attention to them as well. But again, these are my ideas. I still think these games have, done some amazing things, and still, the great news is there's still areas for growth for us all, and I think that's fantastic.
And yeah, getting back to what you just said about kind of giving the player a new skill or a new power that then translates into the world around them. That, I think, is definitely one of the high points, but it's also incredibly hard to do without being seen as, I guess, gamey or fake. Like Tomb Raider, like the recent Tomb Raider games is a really good example of this, where you have all these like wooden platforms or wooden walls that, for some reason, despite having guns and a that climbing hook of death, she can't break through until at one point she stumbles across, I think, rope in a cavern, and then she MacGyvers it into like a grappling hook arrow that can then be used to pull these wooden walls down the world. And again, it's only used for that specific obstacle and nothing else. And
Mm.
it again, it always comes off as being very, I think, fakey to the actual game mechanics.
So I think that's an interesting point. And what I find though with the latest Tomb Raiders, I find that they're kind of more Metroidvania in style. Now, like God of War has a similar sort of style in terms of that as well, where you would revisit, and
Yeah.
this time, you've got the Blades of Chaos, and then this will now melt something. You've got the chisel to open certain doors. So I agree. It's hard to blend that together, and there's some better examples than others. But I think what you can do with an open world, and again, mine's all in theory, mate. Like until we see it out there, I'm not too sure. And like I said, I'm sure there's other developers far smarter than me coming up with some great ideas right now as we speak. Hopefully not in my time because it's almost midnight. So like, hopefully they're getting sleep. But I think one of the things to do with that is it's about kind of like splitting it up, similar to like that of Metroidvania. But within an open world, you'd have certain elements that you can still do, around the world. But maybe there would be now like twists, or the events would change if you unlocked that mechanic. The areas that was once designed for maybe a simple combat is now designed for something to help encourage that mechanic. But again, that comes down to now crafting more kind of more missions in an area. And again, that takes more time, more money, more developers. But I think again, moving forward with it, I think that it'll be interesting to see where things go. And as we were mentioning just there, I think the big thing to take away with all these open worlds, and you mentioned the Ubisoft kind of way earlier, I think what's going to be interesting now, especially seeing games have these great examples with that of Breath of the Wild. I think God of War is not actually like an open world game, but it's got very kind of like semi-open world kind of feel to it. I think as long as people kind of understand, or developers, and I'm sure they all do, but as long as you're trying to tie it in with the overall pillar, I know it's so easy to say this, but the overall goal of your game, I think that's going to make it feel even better. That's going to make it feel believable in that world. That's going to make it feel engaging as well. No one wants to do just a carbon copy and then like a reskin, but by adding different elements and really understanding and pushing what the game is, I think that will be exciting to see. I'm just curious, mate, like what do you think is one of the open worlds that you've enjoyed the most?
I would say like in like my top five, I would include stuff like Hulk Ultimate Destruction,
Oh wow,
Just
yeah.
Cause 2 at the time. I haven't played that in a few years, and I really did enjoy Breath of the Wild. And I want to spend a few minutes on that game because I think we could definitely dedicate a chunk of this cast to it.
For sure.
Before we get to that, Withered asked another question.
Awesome.
How would you solve balancing with a completely open world? It would be like a completely adaptive system depending on player level, or how about new enemy types? So I think they're referring to the idea of having the world scale around the player.
Right.
And
Okay.
this is something that we've seen a lot of developers try and embrace. The recent Assassin's Creed games would be a really good example of this. Skyrim, probably one of the more infamous examples. And what this, of course, means is that you have kind of that abstracted enemy level.
hmm
And as you level up, the enemies will level up accordingly. Now, some games do this very one to one. If I'm level
Yeah.
6, every enemy is going to be level 6, or if I'm on hard mode, they're going to be level 7. And on one hand, it always keeps things feeling interesting, but it also hurts kind of like your growth. because you're never going to feel more powerful if, I'm now level 20, but now every
Yeah.
enemy around me is level 25. And it's very hard, I feel, to make this feel meaningful. This is
Mm.
one of the issues I had with the Assassin's Creed games of recent, where it's like, I'm going to do my perfect job sneaking around, I'm going to attack this guy. Oh wait,
Mm.
he's 6 levels above me. He's going to shrug my death stab to the neck now.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think it's a great question, so thank you very much for asking. This one, man, I've not worked much with in terms of balancing in the sense of like an RPG, a scale or level system. So when you hear me talk about it, please know it's just me talking from gaming experience. Difficulty in levels is obviously different because that's more about the challenge within the structure, within the level itself. So I think I remember one of the big trends after Dark Souls and Bloodborne was, if you wandered in that game too far or in an area that you were not equipped for, the enemies were at such a high level, they basically forced you to go in a different direction. And I think there's something to be said about that style. Now, again, this is me just spitballing. So again, in theory, it might sound good, but in practice, might not work. I think one of the things very interesting that we can think about with this is the fact that I would first set it up in similar at first with these kind of Dark Soul things where you have each kind of sub-district, subsection of the open world to have their designated levels. I think that's one thing that can really help. And also, you can still win against those. I agree. I think having things like levels affecting kind of physical moves where you can grab someone, I think that kind of can be sometimes frustrating in its own sense. But where you beat it on skill, like you could still go through Dark Souls and beat that on skill. But what I would do is kind of then have, because you don't want the player to come back and just wipe everyone out. So what I'd then have, say after you max level it up, or as you progress through and you want to come back to a smaller, a previously, beginning area, I would then have it where I would have them being able to set another level. Like, so each section has two types of levels. So once you check, the player is now level 5, it now sets up these previous levels that were, 5 to 10. They can now go up to say 20 now. So again, you still feel a bit of a challenge, but you still get that sense of overpowering. But one of the things I think would be nice at the end, or when you're like starting to hit, is by introducing a different faction as well. By introducing that, it automatically makes this faction feel stronger. You know that they're going to give you a challenge versus old factions which you've already previously bested. So by having that and understanding when it's the right time to introduce new factions as well, that can help with balancing too. But again, like I said, I don't have much experience in this one. This is all kind of different ideas. So I don't know if it's the best answer, but those are some of the thoughts that I would go through to do that. So I hope that answers your question, mate.
And like with something like Dark Souls, it felt
Mm.
more organic along those lines. Because again, you don't
Yes.
see the levels of an enemy. You don't know if that skeleton's level 30 or soul level 15. My voice is
Yeah.
dying 1 second. There we go. That's always a good sign.
The sacrifice for this podcast, mate, for this
Yeah.
shows on you, my friend.
But instead of seeing that, as you
Mm.
said, as with Dark Souls, they kind of do this kind of a spreading out from the beginning level. So that
Yeah.
when you're 30 hours in and you run into maybe like an enemy that looks similar to like those level 2 enemies or those guys starting out the gate, they're going to do a lot more damage because you're
Yeah.
further along. And as you said, I think one of the best things about what they did is that you are free to kind of hang yourself with your own rope or your own noose in that game. If you want to fight
Yeah.
that Red Eyes Knight in Demon Souls, who's in like the first area, you can do that. He's going to kick your
Yes.
butt, but if you're good enough and you can get around him, you're going to get a very big reward for that. And I always found it to feel a little bit more organic compared to, again, like the enemy level. Like this was
Mm.
one of those things, and my longtime fans know that I don't like having like enemy levels in kind of like these kinds of games
Mm.
because it just again feels very artificial. That I can be really good, but because this guy has a 10 on his profile and I'm a 5, my headshots don't mean a damn thing. This was one of
Yeah.
the big issues with God of War. That in that game, any enemy who was 5 levels above Kratos was instantly unstoppable. And they designed it that way, that it didn't matter how good you were at that game, 5 levels or more, they will one shot you every time. Guaranteed.
See, I wonder then, mate, like in the example you gave there, would that have frustrated you less if you didn't see the level? Like, is it more on the fact that because that level is present, that's why you're because then it becomes a bit more obvious to you that it's maybe not necessarily based on skill. Like you could probably still beat that, but like you're saying, like you've got to play the perfect game. But even in Demon Souls and Dark Souls, you still have to play the perfect game to get past those enemies which are way higher than you. So I wonder if it comes down to, and it's not just you, I think that other people have spoken about this topic as well, but by having a number above the head, you can see me, I'm level 1. But like but like to see that, would that change how you feel, I wonder?
I think it really depends because again, like when we talk about this kind of level scaling, it's a
Mm.
system on top of the stats of that character. It's basically the game saying, is level difference 5 or more? If it's
Mm.
yes, then they will basically multiply all the stats of the enemy times 50 or 100. The
Yeah.
second that level difference changes, and this is what I think really hurts it, in my opinion, that I can literally be fighting an enemy who's 5 levels above me and he'll kill me. I could walk, 10 feet the other direction, kill enemies, get one more level, walk back over, and the entire stat difference is gone. And
Mm.
that, I think, is different than in a game like Dark Souls or in the Souls likes, where those enemy stats are locked. The reason why enemy does so much damage is, well, he does 70 points of damage compared to my 5. If
Yeah.
I go and grind levels, he's still going to be doing 70 points of damage. It's now
Mm.
that my character is stronger. Like, there's no. I think it just feels less artificial in my mind compared to the other way.
It's interesting that one, mate. I think it's an interesting point. And like I said, I do. I think again, it comes back to what is the pillars of that game. Like the upgrading mechanics in God of War is a big part of that game. It's definitely upgrading your items, your armor, Atreus, all of that plays like a huge thing, and I believe it's trying to not only just do that, but show the whole bond because eventually you'll, as a player, will care about
Mm-hmm.
Atreus, so you want to spend time upgrading him. And again, like it's a different approach. People have different kind of opinions with it, but I think, like I say, I think it's an interesting one on how you would do this. Now, I do wonder how much of an effect it would have. I think it's also that tough balance. One of the best quotes I got told for level design, and also it applies to that what we're just talking about here, is it's our job to make it believable,
Yeah.
not realistic. And I think it's a hard balance for that. Like
Yeah. I I always like
sorry,
the
you go
term realistic fiction when I talk
on.
about
That's a
this.
good one.
That yes, we don't have real world analogs to shooting fireballs out of our hands, climbing into mech suits. Although that may be changing in this decade because we're seeing more of
Yeah.
that. But it has to be presented in a way that makes sense within that world.
Yeah.
And it's tough to do that. Again, like this is why we don't see a lot of open world games, let alone like from our previous topic, games that really do a lot of environmental storytelling. It's very hard to do right, and it's very easy to screw up on. And I just want to stop for a quick second as a time check. We are about 40 minutes in. I know you said you had to go for an hour. We may run
Yep.
a little bit ahead of that, but just want to give you the heads up.
Thank
And
you very much.
for the chat as well, I will be giving probably last call for questions in about 10 to 15 minutes. So feel free to keep asking. And for the new folks watching, as a reminder, we do have the Game Wisdom Discord. It is open to everybody and is linked down in the description below. But back on topic, I
Yes.
think one interesting aspect, and I want to get your thoughts on this, and
Mm.
as well as the chat. We're not at Breath of the Wild yet. That's probably going to be our major one at the end here. But another thing that we saw a lot of open world style games do is his introduction of skills and unlocks. We mentioned
Mm.
Tomb Raider earlier. Spider-Man did this. What are some other really good examples? Horizon Zero Dawn, God of War, where actually not so much God of War, but the Far Cry games have been very big on this, where they will start the player off very weak in terms of what you
Yeah.
can and can't do in this world. And Shadow of War and the Lord of the Rings games or Middle Earth are good examples of this, where you have very few ways of actually instigating combat or getting around. And then a big point about the open world gameplay is simply an excuse to turn the player into an unstoppable force of death.
Mm.
In the first Shadow of, I think it was Shadow of Mordor, at the beginning of the game, it's very hard to take out targets. By the end of that game, you are able to headshot snipe lieutenants, jump into a group of 30 guys, kill 10 of them instantly just by a special move, and it's just this case, and we see this a lot in Metroidvania games, where they
Mm.
kind of front load your uselessness, and then a big part of that game is just getting to the point of competency. And again, not every open world game does this.
Yeah.
And I want to get your thoughts on this, and I want the chat to respond as well. What do you think about that sense of progression in an open world structure?
I think this goes back to one of the things we were just speaking to is how important balance is.
Mm-hmm.
Because there's two things like one, how cool did it feel in Shadow of Mordor and War when you got to that ability stage because you felt like an absolute badass, right? But again, you still want challenges coming through. You don't want to be OP'd so much. So I think one of the things that for me is I don't mind it too much, but it's that balance. I still think we've got a lot to kind of figure out as an industry and how to do that. And there's still a lot to learn, but it's not only the balance in terms of the numbers and figures of the enemy versus the player abilities, but it's also that balance on that feeling. Like we mentioned it there, like you mentioned the abilities kind of like in a not in a negative way, but in the sense of like you can feel that difference, but now you feel it in every encounter. Well, like I say it in the sense of like, but it's super fucking cool, right? But again, that comes in balancing of it. I think I'm not against it, but again, it has to be thought through. And end game is always one of the toughest things
Yes.
to figure out, especially in a game like Shadow of Mordor, which has an end. You know, like there's the bit where you defeat the Hand of Sauron, and that literally is the end of the game. Stick a fork in it, it's done.
Mm-hmm.
But you can still play through, obviously, if you want to. But again, it's like, well, how do they go from there versus a game like World of Warcraft or Destiny, which is all about end game. It's all about, okay, well, here's the next
And
challenge.
they
You've now
keep
done that.
adding more to it as well.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's a balancing act, really, in the literal sense and the figurative sense,
Yeah.
to figure it out.
And I'm glad you mentioned Endgame, because that actually brings up another example that I'm surprised the chat didn't beat me to this. The Saints Row franchise.
I was thinking about that when you mentioned Destroy All Humans. Again, like very chaotic and just cause is similar. Yeah, to Saints Row. That's going back now.
Yeah, like Saints Row 3 and 4 run into that very similar issue. That at the start of those games, less so in number 4, it is very annoying to kind of play it. You're forced to drive along. It takes a long time to do anything. Enemies don't die quickly. then by the halfway point, even by the quarter of the way point, you are scaling buildings, you have almost infinite flying, your guns shoot explosive bullets, you get shields, and then by the end, it's basically like nothing other than the final boss possibly can stop you. And like to your point about endgame, like this is often like one of like, the major weaknesses of these kinds of open world games. That it's hard to know just how much the player is going to do. And Control had this problem as
Mm,
well. That I heard when one of the things people told me, they didn't tell me any story detail, but they said, Josh, if you're going to play Control, do all the side quests because you need that experience, you need those upgrades.
yeah,
And
yeah,
you don't know, from a design standpoint, how hard to make your end game. Because you can assume there are going to be people who are going to max out every skill tree, get every perk imaginable, just as there are people who may skip those quests. If
mm,
what is the fair level to take on the final boss? And if you're not careful, you can make the game either too easy or too hard because of that.
yeah. No, completely valid points. And when you, especially the one where you mentioned, don't necessarily know
Mm-hmm.
the level that the player's going to finish out at, because I can't remember what it was, but there's like a statistic where I think it's less than 40% of players actually finish games now. I could be wrong, I could be off, but I think that was one of them for sure. So I do think it will be interesting to see, like you said, to figure out how to balance that one, especially in a game like
Mm-hmm.
World of Warcraft versus say that of Shadow of Mordor. So yeah, no, I think you've got some good points there, mate. And yeah, the RPG systems, the leveling up, they play such a crucial role in these games.
Mm-hmm. And Wither brought up a really good point that we haven't touched on, and this could probably fit its own topic, but the survival genre has kind of
Oh yeah,
really grown into its own form of open world design. He mentioned
yeah,
Rust, The Long Dark, The Forest, Subnautica being another really good example of this.
yeah. Don't
And
Starve as well. Yeah,
and those games I think occupy like a very, I wouldn't say niche, but almost like a different kind of feel compared to what we see on the console side with the open world games that we've mentioned.
yeah. No, I agree. I think they have a very different kind of objective in that, where I think versus say a survival game, there one of the things I think is really interesting with that one is everything's so open
Hmm.
compared to like GTA we talked about in Red Dead. You've got these like big either sprawling cities or there are like hub cities,
Hmm.
big ones just dotted around the map, versus that of survival, which has a lot more kind of open space. Like it really is just you kind of in the elements. There isn't much there. So I think that really encourages players to take advantage, excuse me, sorry, of what they have, whether that be, like crafting to survive,
Hmm.
building up your items, or that of going hunting for either other players to steal their stuff or to find more resources. So yeah, I think they are. I mean, it's a great point there. Very good point by was it Withered who said it? Sorry.
Withered, yeah.
Yeah, great point there. For sure. I think that's yeah a whole subgenre completely. I don't even know where to begin on
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I don't think, unfortunately, we have the time. But like I said when I was on your show, if you are free in the future, we can always have you back on for another discussion.
For
Like, there's
sure.
always time there, and I think it's really tough, like for those kinds of survival games, because it always like to me, like I've tried playing them, and it
Mm,
always felt like once I got into whatever the groove was in those games, like what they wanted me to do or the core gameplay,
yeah.
it just got very repetitive. Like
Okay.
Subnautica is probably the closest I came to finishing one of those games, and even that, I kind of like by like the halfway to three quarters point, I was just like, I don't think I really want to keep playing this game.
Okay.
It just felt like I was just going through the motions. Okay, make sure I have enough food, make sure I have enough drink, move a little bit more forward, build another section of my base. But I think this may be more of a me problem because there are people who have certainly built, like, I've seen my friends post like these elaborate, miniature cities, like underwater cities that they've made in Subnautica.
No, I think I think it is a really interesting one that you bring up there is again like player taste.
Hmm.
How we can all have different feelings from it. You mentioned God of War versus Dark Souls. Some people might walk away feeling different about the two. Like, who knows? But again, as long as it is reflecting into the core of the game, that's the most, to me, the most important thing for us as developers and designers. As long as it's reflecting that and it builds into that world, I think that should be that should be the focus of it. So that, I mean, it's a kind of a cop answer. It's like, as long as it follows its dreams and sticks to its, but like I said, it builds on it. I think that's very, very important.
Yeah. And I have, I guess, two more questions or two more topics. I want to see if we can cover them in the next few minutes. But
Okay.
this will be officially last call for questions for the chat. So the first thing I wanted to touch on. You asked me earlier what were some of my favorite examples of open world gameplay, and
Mm-hmm.
for me, I think the common thread that runs through them is that movement or getting around feels exciting and interesting. Like the
That's a good
basic
point.
elements of that game are interesting to me. So, as a very quick list, again, Hulk Ultimate Destruction, Prototype, which is kind of like the pseudo sequel to that, the Batman games, Breath of the Wild, and even Just Cause to some extent. Like I didn't feel as
Yeah.
well about with the later examples, even Mad Max that was done by the same studio. That the feeling of moving around in those games felt exciting and different.
Mm.
And it's very hard, I think, to get that working. And I think Saints Row goes too far. I think they kind of broke what they had that was fixed. Because by the end of those games, or even by the halfway point, movement didn't really matter. It was just basically pick a direction, super jump, and I'll be there in 3 minutes. Like, it felt like my brain went on autopilot. While something
Yeah.
like the Spider-Man games and Prototype was like, okay, I'm going to run up a wall to jump to air dash to do more wall jumping and more movement. Like, it felt like I was a participant in the
Yeah.
motion rather than just again turning it off.
Yeah. No, I think that's great points there, mate, because it goes back to, we were chatting about earlier about mechanics to expand in the world. But like if you don't have those core mechanics at the beginning, there's something like called like the three C's that you generally design with in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Camera, controller, and character. So all of them will come into it. Like camera, is it first person, third person perspective? Does it move? Does it change during certain kind of mechanics?
Mm-hmm.
Controls, how does that like fit with this? Like what feels comfortable? What are the movements for it? And character is like the mechanics that come with the character,
Mm-hmm.
as well as the character's heights, the metrics that come with that, and all of that to help do it. Like I think just even building on that, which isn't an open world game, but Mario always feels amazing to move. Even in the 64 one, you could just love jumping around. You weren't taught if you held down pulled back on the analog stick, then you would be able to do a backflip.
Mm-hmm.
If you run and do it, you can slide. And all of this there that helps to again keep it engaging. Like I'm just starting to go through Death Stranding, only a few hours in, so please no spoilers anyone. But I wouldn't necessarily say like the movement is exciting, such as Breath of the Wild, where I can surf shield, glide, or Just Cause, where I can blow stuff up on a car and then use that to shoot up. But what it has is a great loop within how you move. You have to grab straps if it goes too much. You have to manage where cargo is on your body to keep balance as well. So that keeps it engaging as well. So yeah, I think that's a really good point, and making sure, especially if you're got such a big ground to cover,
Mm-hmm.
how do you know it doesn't necessarily just have to be what we said. It could be about like pacing of interactions. Like every 30 seconds, you could meet something that gives you a quest. Maybe you come across bandits. Maybe some civilian wants help. All of that can help break it up as well. But I think, yeah, like just 100% agreeing with you, mate. You need that core, and like for people who want to build on that core, 3Cs is something that I do recommend for people.
And don't get me started on Mario, because that will take us to hour 3 and 4 of just what makes that different in terms of how the technicality of the motion really adds to it. But
Yeah.
my final point, and again, we'll see how bad this goes in terms of killing our time. I've been holding off talking about Breath of the Wild, but I want to spend at least a few minutes on that and talk about what that game did differently. But first, I need a cough. There we go. Breath of the Wild, for me, I know some people who did not like that game. They felt it kind of got way away from the Legend of Zelda formula. For me, I think it's it may be in like my top 10 or top 20 of all time games I played.
Yeah, I agree.
And one of the things that it did in terms of open world design that I haven't played Death Stranding yet, so I don't know if it went this route. What I loved about Breath of the Wild was how all the mechanics felt like they worked within the world itself. Like, this is the complete counterexample of Tomb Raider, where, like I said earlier, to open up the wooden door, you must only use the grapple arrow. If there's, a bush in the way, you must use the fire arrow. In Breath of the Wild, is basically, here's all these crazy toys you can play with.
Yeah.
Use them, however you want. So if you want to go like a mile away, grab a metal platform using magnetism, bring it back to a section, make it easier to platform, you can do this. Do you want to walk down this mountain, or do you want to shield slide down this mountain? Or my favorite, shield slide into the glide, and then just fly in that direction? You can do it. And it really, I think, occupies that kind of emergent gameplay or emergent game design. And as you've been saying throughout the cast of how you want or how you would love to see open world games evolve, that to me is where I want to see things go. I want to be given these tools that I can use them from start to finish in a huge variety of ways. And when it works like that, I think. And the thing I think that what makes this very difficult is that this is not like RPG rules or systems. These are creating, unique tools that can then be applied within this world. Again, going back to that concept of realistic fiction. That again, like there's no such thing as the infinite bomb that Link gets in Breath of the Wild. But once we get that, we can start putting together, okay, how can I use this within this space? And there's no real sense of like that kind of abstracted leveling. Like Link doesn't unlock new skills; he grows more power. But you get all your tools again within the first 40 minutes of playing the game.
Yeah, no, you took the words out of my mouth, mate. Like, I completely agree. Like the fact that you said you're given all of that right off the beginning, and then what also makes it cool from there is like. We were talking about sections having different kind of feel to them, and they use that with the kind of the snowy areas as well as like the super hot lava area. They do use that to the sand. They have environmental elements that are used not only for gating but to build up believability, which we talked about. Like one of the shrines you have to go to is up on that frost mountain, but because you don't have warm clothes, you start to shiver and freeze really quickly. And it's a great way to just show some forms of gating without taking away the powers from the player. And sorry, you go on, mate.
I was going to say, and then there are ways to circumvent that. Eat, cook the hot food or cook the cold food in the warm areas. And as you said, it never feels like artificial. Like the game never just puts down a wall saying, you must get a Link to level 7 or you will never be able to get through this area.
Yeah. I think again, I've been banging on about the core so long. One of the core pillars of that game was exploration, and because you have everything, you want to go and explore, and you'll have played it differently to how I will have.
Hmm.
Like the first area that you go to is probably different to the first one that I did, and we did it in different orders.
Oh
Or maybe one of us didn't even complete all areas. We just went straight to Hyrule Castle,
yeah.
and there's so much in there which is just. I think that what I love about that is you're only limited by your creativity. And like the thing that I realized is I'm not very creative because damn, I should have done stuff like that. Why was I even hitting people with my weapons?
Hmm. Yeah, like I've seen speedruns of that game, and it still blows my mind that there are people who will immediately go to Hyrule Castle and beat the game. And I'm
Yeah.
just sitting there going, I will never be that good enough at this game to do that task. And
No, I agree.
I think again there is so much. Like, I'm really trying to resist just keeping you on for like another 40 minutes to an hour because there's so much I think really get into about this.
Mm.
Um, I guess
I,
final again there's so many more things I want to discuss, but very quickly I think going back to a board's comment from earlier about game open end or open world games having an actual hard end to them outside
mm.
of like of a live service kind of design. Do you think there is a way to either make that end feel meaningful or to just kind of not have an ending? Like Control, I think does a somewhat well. That again, it ends the game, but then it leaves the door open to all these new DLC chapters.
Mm. I think if you're going to do it, you have to have it in mind. Like live games, I feel like they may have been around for a while, but in the grand scheme of, even the last decade,
Mm-hmm.
we're probably only in from 2014, 2015 onwards. Like, I know you can talk about World of Warcraft, but I mean that more in the sense of console games
Yeah.
these cycles of now we do DLC, different updates, and that for what, like if you put Control in the PlayStation 2, Xbox One era, they probably wouldn't. There wouldn't be much you could do with them. Like that game would have ended and that's it. It's only because things have changed that these now still get that new lease of life with DLC as well as invitations for players to continue. I I'm not sure that I have the answer, to be honest, in terms of how best to do it. I'm still learning myself and all these elements. I think though, if you're going to do it, like I say, do just make it part of the actual game. Don't don't just quickly add it on for the sake of adding it on. Make sure that there is things for people to do. You mentioned earlier you never know how much stuff will be completed by the player before the end. So don't just rely on, oh, the players might not have completed this, so we'll just kind of leave it be because they might not have done it, because then some players will have, obviously.
Yeah.
But
And I,
yeah, I don't really have an answer, I'm afraid. Sorry.
and I would add on to that, always make sure that your content can still reward the player by doing it.
Mm,
Because it's very easy, especially, again, MMOs have been brought up a lot in this discussion, and we saw a lot of MMOs level gate quests and stories. Like Guild Wars 2, I think, is the standout example of avoiding that by just scaling everything. You go into an area
yeah.
to do a quest, you scale down, but then those rewards scale up to what you were at. That to me
Mm.
is one of the most brilliant ideas that I am surprised more people didn't steal that concept from that game. But
It's amazing seeing like so many different mechanics that you thought would be
mhm.
kind of taken and adapted, which don't. I always think that's really interesting.
Yeah, and again, this goes back to like Breath of the Wild, that you will always get rewarded by doing a shrine or doing a quest, because you're going to get something that will aid you no matter what time or what progress point in the game you're going to be at.
Yeah.
And again, I think here's my ending, and then I'll throw over to you. Like as you said, it's just about understanding what you're trying to do within that gameplay loop, and making sure that's always your focal point.
Yeah.
And if that means adding in all kinds of crazy mechanics, you can do that, but it has to make sense within the game space. And it has to make sense within that gameplay loop. Because you don't want the player, again, I think the failure point when we talk about open world games is when it feels gamey or artificial. Like the first generation open world games, the open world layer doesn't really matter. It's just about doing those missions. And it takes a lot to get this to work, and hence again why very few games can accomplish that task. I am as excited as anyone's going to be for Breath of the Wild 2. Just tell me when that game's out and I'm going to throw money at it. But it's one of those things that even like Bethesda has ran into this trouble. Again, we saw how bad Fallout 76 turned out to be. And to get it done right, it's going to make you feel like a hero. But you screw it up, and there goes years of development down the drain.
Yeah. No, I mean, some good points there, mate, is like, just because you done it well for one game doesn't mean those rules will translate well to another. Like having GTA kind of gore and threat system, in terms of the stars on Breath of the Wild just feel weird. Because that doesn't work with exploration. It doesn't work with being a hero, So I think that's a very good point, mate. I think what I'll end it on for me is I'm excited to see where all these are going. There's amazing developers out there who are extremely smart, doing incredible things. And I think now with Breath of the Wild, encouraging and pushing that, God of War doing its own thing, and like plenty of others. Days Gone does great stuff as well. Mm-hmm. I'm excited to see where all of this goes. I think this year, well, maybe not this year, but this decade, I think we'll see a lot more advancements in that of open worlds. As for what they are, who knows? I don't know. But I think it'll be exciting to see it all progress as we move forward, man. I think it's super exciting.
All right, I think that is as good of an endpoint we're going to get here, unless we want to spend another hour or two discussing things. I think there's a 6-hour time difference, so
yes,
it is a bit late for you. So to end the cast on, for people who want to follow you and the things that you do, what are the best places to do that?
For sure. The best place, if you want to find out more about level design, you can check out the Level Design Lobby podcast. You can find that on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, Spotify, or any of the podcast apps. It will be available for you there. If you want to receive more bite-sized level design chunks, then you can follow me on Twitter, which is @MaxPears, MaxPears, all one word. And that's the best way to get in touch with me. And I hope that some of you have enjoyed this. I've enjoyed being on your castmate. Thank you for letting me come on, and thank you for everyone asking questions as well. I really do appreciate it.
Yeah. And to my fans as well as your fans watching this, thank you for tuning in. If you'd like to follow me, the best place will be on Twitter @GWBicer. I am on there all the time, as well as here on the Game Wisdom YouTube channel. You will find a link to my Discord down below, where I am on there chatting. People are memeing me at record pacing there, and we like to talk game design. If you are a developer or have any capacity in the industry and like to come on for a live or recorded cast, please don't hesitate to get in touch. And you can find me on Patreon at patreon.com/GWBicer. Donations will help out to keep things running along. And people who donate will get early and ad-free access to our talks, just as this one. And if you want to plug your Patreon, Max, feel free.
Oh, okay, sure. So if you want to help my podcast, then please do head over to patreon.com/level design lobby, where you gain access to many different things, such as the Discord. We have level design weekends, set tasks for all of you to complete, like a mini test. You get to create cool stuff for your portfolios, or even mentorships as well. So if you're looking for some stuff to help increase your career, head over there for some great rewards.
I need to start doing that. We need to have some game design quizzes here. Just force everyone in chat to do some homework before you go on my podcast. That would be perfect. All right. But again, Max, it was a pleasure hanging out with you here and on your podcast. We can again, let's not be strangers, and we can do
For
more about
sure.
this in the future. And for those of you watching, be sure to come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, worries of the art and science of games. Until our next stream and discussion, have a great night.